US President Donald Trump spoke to his Russian counterpart, President Vladimir Putin, on the Israel-Iran war. Now, according to Trump, both leaders agreed that the conflict between Iran and Israel should end. Well, taking to the Truth Social account, Trump said that Russian president felt that the war between Israel and Iran should end, to which Trump responded that he had shared similar sentiment about Russia's war in Ukraine. Trump added that the call lasted for an hour and majorly focused on the Israel-Iran crisis, while Russia-Ukraine war took a backseat. Now, parallel to this, Kremlin issued a statement saying that Vladimir Putin condemned Israel's military operation against Iran and has expressed serious concern about a possible escalation of the conflict. Trump, for his part, described events in the Middle East as very alarming. According to Ushakov, now the two leaders said that they do not rule out a return to the negotiating track on Iran's nuclear program, Ushakov said. Yuri Ushakov also said on Ukraine that Putin told the U.S. leader that Russia was ready to continue negotiations with the Ukrainians after June 22nd. Trump reiterated his interest in a speedy resolution to the conflict, the Kremlin aide said. Putin also congratulated Trump on his 79th birthday. And for more on this, we're being joined live by Mr. Jonathan Waschel from New York. He's a Director of Communications and Senior Policy Advisor at the U.S. Mission to the United Nations, and he's a Global Affairs Analyst. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast on WION World this one.
Pleasure, Dishka.
So we know that Israel and Iran have carried out a new wave of attacks on key cities, and it has fueled fears of an all-out sustained war with heavy exchanges now entering a third day. Now, with neither side seeming willing to back down, how far do you think this conflict would spiral if neither side is willing to blink first?
First of all, Dishka, I'm a former director of communications. Just want to make that clarification. But this is going to go as long as it has to go in terms of Israel's set goal to degrade Iran's nuclear program to such a level that they do not feel the existential threat that's been hanging over them for decades, actually, and calls by Iranian leaders, one after another, for the complete destruction of Israel. So Israel's in this for the long haul. How long Iran is willing to continue to be retaliating and firing back at the Israelis and hitting civilian infrastructure within Israel, and then take the hits from Israel on now its energy sector, which of course will cause great harm to Iran's economic situation. So this is really, I don't see an end in sight right now, certainly.
Right, Mr. Waschel, and for now, the fighting between Israel and Iran seems restricted to the two nations. Now, at the United Nations and elsewhere, there have been widespread calls for restraint. But what if they fall on deaf ears? We know that despite the U.S. denials, Iran is convinced of United States complicity in Israeli strikes on Iran. And this essentially indicates that Iran could strike U.S. targets across the Middle East. And in case of that eventuality, how would it alter the course of the conflict?
Look, if the United States is pulled into this conflict because Iran decides to hit U.S. military targets overseas around the Gulf, for instance, or in Syria or something like that, it's the end of Iran's regime. The United States would not stop. It would take out so much that Iran would not be able to return, to be honest. So I wouldn't see Iran doing such a move like this right now. Iran is, I guess, for lack of a better word, enjoying that it's just Israel right now going tete-a-tete with the country right now and taking incoming missiles, and then the Israelis hitting back at them. So presumably the Iranian regime believes that it can continue for a while here. Now, you know, this really can hit different levels here. If the Israelis continue now to hit at the oil sector, And Iran has been hitting population centers in Israel, causing casualties now and a lot of destruction. The Israelis initially were hitting military targets. Those were the targets, even though there had been some collateral damage. Military targets initially. The Israelis are now changing the calculus here. So Iran may begin to feel a level of economic pressure that may cause it to take a different direction here. But there's so much unseen here, Dishka. We don't know what exactly Iran has in its arsenal, and there are very grave concerns that there might be acts of terrorism, targets outside of Israel itself that might be struck globally, actually, something that Iran has done in the past.
Absolutely, sir. And this also raises questions about the future of diplomacy here. And if Iran would return to the negotiating table for the sixth round of nuclear talks, and while it seems unlikely, do you think there is any circumstance under which Iran might reconsider its current stance?
You know, it's interesting, the conversation that you mentioned between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump today. You know, there's a level of course, hypocrisy here, given what Putin's been doing with Ukraine and you know, calling for an end to this conflict and condemning Israel for lashing out at essentially a country, a regime that has called for its annihilation. But that said, there is an effort by certainly Russia in the statement by the spokesperson and what Putin said to President Trump, a desire to return to the negotiations. Now, let's not forget that it is Iran that has been providing Russia with drones, kamikaze drones that have been used to tremendous and devastating effect against Ukrainian population centers. And there is the strategic military alliance between China, Iran, and Russia. So watching this particular regime in Iran go down is not something that Vladimir Putin, who is an autocratic leader, and the theocracy, which is also autocratic in nature in Iran, to have that end up collapsing would certainly put Russia, specifically Vladimir Putin, in a bit of hot water, at least, be more of a target.
Right. So, and Netanyahu has been making the argument for many years now that Israel faces an existential threat if Iran gets a nuclear bomb. And to underline this renewed urgency, a senior Israeli military official has said that there was information that Iran had enough material to make 50 nuclear bombs within days. Now, having said that, there may also have been another very different factor at play here. Now, according to you, how much of it is a reflection of the long-standing power struggle in the region, and how much comes down to Iran's nuclear ambitions?
The basic truth here, Diksha, is that Israel has been at war with Iran ever since, you know, even before, but since Hamas pulled off the October 7th atrocity that launched the war between Israel and Gaza against Hamas. And then Hezbollah, which is another Iranian arm, entered the fray. And then you had the Houthis, which is armed and supported by Iran, also in the fray. You've had the Syrian militias also in the fray, and Bashar Assad, before he was toppled, you know, creating havoc for Israel. And then you had the Iraqi militias also going after Israel. And all of this was backed by Iran throughout and still is. So in principle, now we're seeing Israel and Iran going at each other. But Israel's been at warfare with Iran for many years, for decades, arguably. So, you know, yes, there is the nuclear threat, which, of course, you know, India, you know of all things what a threat it is to have neighboring Pakistan and the threat of a nuclear holocaust hanging over your heads, and the fear of Islamist militancy of what you experienced in Kashmir, for instance, and the back and forth that you had with Pakistan recently. Now, you know, those two countries, Pakistan and India, are giant, huge in comparison to what we're talking about here with Israel, which is, you know, like one little province, small province within India in size, and then Iran, which is a substantially large country. So it's just a very different thing here. But, you know, India didn't take it. India had enough, struck out. And here we have Israel also having taken this preemptive strike, very fearful of where things were heading with the nuclear dimension of Iran, and enough was enough. And if Iran has nuclear weapons to use, then it'll have tremendous liberty to be able to execute the hegemonic activities that it did across the Middle East, from Lebanon to Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Gaza. It's been an ongoing fight for many, many years.
Right, so and you've rightly pointed out that while the situation has a similar strain, but the situation in India and Pakistan and what we're seeing in West Asia is as similar as apples and oranges right now. But also that, shifting our focus back to West Asia, Israeli attacks seem to have inflicted an unprecedented degree of damage on Iran's nuclear and military capabilities. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has suggested that this might go on for days. There's also this view that these attacks may be a ploy to undermine Iran's internal stability and possibly force a change in leadership. So what's your take on that?
Dishka, the regime in Iran is deeply unpopular. Some say unpopular with the majority of the population that really don't want to live in conditions in which, the Kurds, for instance, they make up most of the political prisoners or the executions that are happening in Iran. Problems with the inability for women to walk around without wearing a hijab. And restrictions in other natures within the country, and of course a regime that has enjoyed power and living in luxury. I mean, some of the gifts that we've seen in social media coming out of Iran, for instance, when some of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard leaders and others were killed by the Israelis in precision strikes on their apartments. There were memes going around about how all these guys are living in luxury while normal Tehrani people are actually having to make ends meet and living in difficult conditions, while the country spends so much on its military activities and essentially causing a lot of discord across the region. So the regime is really in a pretty precarious position. And if this continues, if the energy sector is hit in such a way that we begin to see blackouts and inabilities of normal people to have access to basic needs in the country, we've already seen protests erupt when that type of condition happened in the past. And right now, the country is fighting a war with the regime is fighting a war with its foe Israel. And in the past, that wasn't going on when they were able to turn their military might against their own people to crush dissent. So it is definitely a very difficult line that the Iranian regime will have to walk if this conflict continues much longer.
Right, Mr. Watchell, please stay with us. We have a breaking news coming in. In the latest developments from Israel's Bat Yam, some 35 people are missing after Iranian missiles hit a residential building in the area. Well, rescuers are racing against time to extract the missing amid fears that the building could collapse. 3 people have been confirmed dead, while over 130 have been wounded. Now, those killed include 2 women and a child. Israeli emergency workers are carrying out rescue operations in the area. But once again, reiterating for our viewers, this is the latest we're getting. And in the latest developments from Israel's Bat Yam, some 35 people are reportedly missing after Iranian missiles hit a residential building in the area. Rescuers are racing against time to extract the missing amid fears that the building could collapse. Now, 3 people have been confirmed dead, while over 130 have been wounded. Now, those killed include 2 women and a child. Israeli emergency workers are carrying out rescue operations in the area. Thanks for staying with us, Mr. Watchell. And given the latest developments, we'd like to get your reaction on the latest damage that we're recording right now and what we're seeing in Israel.
So, Dishka, if you've spent time in that region, in the Levant, and particularly the Tel Aviv area, Bat Yam is so close. It's as if, a couple of kilometers away from Delhi, you had this type of devastation hit. So there will certainly be a lot of anger and desire to meet punishment on Iran for what has happened here. The public just won't stand for this type of thing. So I would anticipate that you would have the threats of hitting Iranian infrastructure that Prime Minister Netanyahu talked about doing if the Iranians would not stop hitting Israeli population centers like they've just done and to devastating effect, I would expect that we're going to begin to see the Israelis start to target stuff beyond the military sites that they've been focused on, and that would presumably be bridges, power stations, things like that, that would really meet that level of punishment that would make it very difficult for the regime to face its population that would grow increasingly aggravated with what they're doing and causing in response from the Israelis.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Wortel, for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspective with us.
Pleasure.